I want to welcome you to the Sacraments class. This is the first of a video lecture that I'll be making a series of as we go on. And I wanted to begin today with just a couple of ideas. I guess I should probably introduce myself first. My name is Paul Fromberg. I'm the rector of St. Gregory of Nyssa. I'm going to look forward to seeing you all in January. And I'm a big believer in both liturgy and the power of sacraments in congregational life. But for our first week of study, given the readings that I've assigned, I really want to ask the critical question of what liturgy is for. This is a quote from one of the people that you're going to be reading, Gordon Lathrop. He says, "Having gathered together, the community is formed into faith in the creation of God and trust in the salvation present in Christ," which indicates that what liturgy is for is a process of formation, transformation, and making new. Liturgical theology makes the meaning of worship clear to us. In the liturgy, we are searching for words that are appropriate to the nature of God. So the meaning of liturgy is, first of all, in the liturgy itself. We actually have to look closely at the liturgy. Another way of thinking about the ways that we get meaning out of the liturgy is to think of doxological theology, which is a phrase that another scholar, Alexander Schmemann, uses, which describes the relationship that we have with God. We love God, and therefore we want to know more about God and the ways of God in the world. So liturgical theology from this particular perspective is a way of making sense out of the relationship that God has with people. Worship as an event, as something that happens when the people gather together, is itself capable of explaining who God is to us. And it's important to recognize that it is a communal action. We are worshiping together with other people, which means that we have to worship in a particular way. I mean, we don't have to. We could ignore the people around us, but that would be, in my estimation, worshiping in bad faith. So we have to ask ourselves the question of what we believe that we're doing when we come to worship. Now there's a phrase that floats around a lot, which is lex orandi, lex credendi, which sometimes people say the law of prayer equals the law of belief. And it's the equal sign between those two, which is a problem. It's actually, lex orandi, lex credendi is a shorter version of a longer Latin phrase, ut legerin credenda lex statuat supplicandi, which is the law of supplication establishes the law of belief. And that actually places the action of worship into an appropriate context. We gather to worship in order to pray to God, to make our petitions to God, both for ourselves, for the assembly present, and for the whole world. And it's in that process, which you'll notice is a relational process, both between the individual and God and the assembly gathered together, that we are learning what it means to believe. So the event of worship is also the place where we come to understand what it is ultimately that we believe. One thing to keep in mind when you analyze worship, and I hope that you will begin to look at the liturgies that you participate in with a loving and critical eye, one thing that we talk about is a thick reading of worship. That is to say, looking at the specific details of worship, trying to understand in specific detail and in deep detail what people are doing, or more provocatively, what they think they're doing, because very often people don't attend real deeply to what it is they think that they're doing. It's when we study the liturgy in this kind of detail, when we pay attention to the words and the actions and the objects of the liturgy, that we're actually doing theology. And from this perspective, we can call the liturgy primary theology. You don't need to explain the liturgy. The liturgy itself is its own text. Now, another concept that I want you to think about is what happens when we think about liturgy. And when we use texts or write text to attempt to describe or explain what's going on, that's what we call secondary liturgical theology, which is always kind of critical and frequently is reforming. Another concept I want you to think about is when a theological analysis of the liturgy turns toward a specific problem of our own time. This is properly called pastoral liturgical theology. And an example of that in the Episcopal Church is the question of developing rites for blessing same-sex unions and the whole process that went into that. And we can talk some more about that either in the discussion forum or when we're face-to-face in January. We're going to be doing all of these different kinds of theological reflection on the liturgy as a part of this course. And you're actually going to be making theological decisions on the basis of your experience of the liturgy. And I hope we'll be doing pastoral liturgical theology when it comes to the case studies that we'll be interacting with when we're together in January. I want to give you just a very brief bit of information about the people that you're going to be reading this week. One of them is me, Paul Fromberg. You're going to be reading a part of my doctoral thesis, which I just finished in June. Another is Paul Bradshaw. Paul Bradshaw is an emeriti professor at Notre Dame, who's a specialist in the history of early Christian liturgy. Gordon Lathrop is a professor of liturgy emeritus at the Lutheran Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, and his text, which is one of the required books for you to have, is a great book. We're not going to read the whole thing in this course, but I hope that you will take the time to read as much as you can. And finally, there's a journal article by Mark Searle. Mark was instrumental in the sort of development of the idea of pastoral liturgical theology, who died tragically in 1992 when he was still quite a young man. He, in addition to working at the Center for Pastoral Liturgy, was also in the theology faculty at Notre Dame. So that's a little bit about the people that we're going to be reading this week. That's a little bit of introduction about the whole area of liturgical theology. I hope that you will enjoy the readings, and remember to make notes, things that you observe or questions that you have that can be brought to the discussion forum. Thanks a lot, and I'll be posting another video for next week.